The holographic scoreboard above the Meridian Arena flickered with the bracket draw, and the crowd of 11,000 alien spectators erupted into a sound that rattled the plasteel rafters. The name at the bottom of the bracket, slotted into the opening round position, reserved for wildcard entrants who had no ranking and no sponsor, read, DARA OSEI Human, unaffiliated. The laughter started immediately. It came from the Cathari section first, a rippling hiss that passed through the reptilian audience like wind through tall grass. Then from the Voss contingent, who expressed amusement by drumming their lower arms against their thoraxes in a rapid staccato. Then from the neutral galleries, where a dozen species who had traveled to Meridian Station, specifically to watch the 73rd Open Grappling Invitational, found the bracket draw's final entry more entertaining than any of the seeded matches. Grandmaster Vorik Then, seated in the elevated judge's alcove, noticed the laughter. He noticed everything. That was the function of a grandmaster. He was Cathari, 12 feet of corded muscle wrapped in iridescent green scales, with a jaw that could crack hull plating and eyes that processed motion at 3 times the speed of most species in the arena. He had held the title of Grandmaster of the Open for 19 consecutive cycles. He had retired from competition 6 cycles ago to adjudicate, because there was nobody left who could make the matches interesting. He looked at the human's name on the scoreboard. He looked at the bracket position. He looked at the first-round opponent assigned to Dara Osei, Torek Vaughn, a Cathari mid-ranked grappler with 73 professional bouts and a submission rate of 81%. Then made a small notation on his adjudication tablet. It was not a note about the human. It was a note to remind himself to speak with the bracket committee about padding the first round with exhibition entries that would be eliminated in under 2 minutes. It wasted everyone's time. Down on the arena floor, Dara Osei was stretching. She was 26 years old, compact, dark-skinned, with close-cropped hair and the kind of economy in her movements that suggested she had learned a long time ago not to waste anything, especially motion. She wore a plain gray training suit, no sponsor logos, no team colors, no insignia of any kind. Her feet were bare. Her hands were wrapped in simple white cloth tape. The arena floor was a circular platform 60 meters in diameter, surfaced with a friction-bonded polymer that adjusted its grip coefficient based on the weight and foot structure of the competitors. Around it, tiered seating rose in concentric rings, filled with species of every size and metabolism. The lighting was competition standard, bright, shadowless, designed to give judges and cameras an unobstructed view of every movement from every angle. Dara finished her stretching routine and stood. She looked up at the scoreboard, found her name, found her opponent's name, and nodded once. Then she turned and walked toward the competitor staging area, a tunnel at the arena's north edge where fighters waited for their bouts. She passed a cluster of Cathari competitors on her way. 3 males and a female, all of them in the burnished gold training suits that marked them as students of the Vosk School, one of the 7 premier grappling academies on the Cathari homeworld. They were large, fast, and they had been drilling together since morning. The floor around their warm-up area was scored with claw marks from practice throws. The largest of them, a male with a scar running from his jaw to the ridge above his left eye, watched Dara pass. He said something to his companions in rapid Cathari. The translation implant in Dara's left ear caught most of it, small, soft, exhibition filler, out in the first exchange. The scarred Cathari raised his voice. He wanted her to hear the next part. "Human," he called, "you registered for the Open." Dara stopped. She turned. "Yes." "The Combat Open, the Grappling Invitational." He made a show of looking her up and down, his head tilting on his thick neck. "Not the cultural exchange seminar, not the diplomatic reception. The fighting competition." "I know what it is." The scarred Cathari spread his arms wide, a Cathari gesture of theatrical incredulity. Does your species have grappling? I was under the impression humans settled their disputes with small projectile weapons and strongly worded diplomatic notes. The other Cathari made the hissing sound. Laughter. One of them slapped the floor with her tail, which was the Cathari equivalent of slapping a knee. "We have grappling," Dara said. "Show me," the scarred one said, and his tone shifted. Not threatening exactly, dismissive, the voice of someone offering a child the chance to demonstrate a skill they could not possibly possess because the demonstration itself would be the entertainment. "Show me a technique, one technique. So we know you are not completely wasting Grandmaster Then's time." Dara looked at him. She did not show him a technique. She turned and walked into the staging tunnel. Behind her the hissing laughter doubled. The scarred Cathari called after her, "Run, little human. The bracket is kinder than the floor." The staging area was cool and dim, a deliberate contrast to the bright arena. Fighters waited here in separated bays, each equipped with a hydration station, a medical scan unit, and a display screen showing the live feed of the current bout. Dara's bay was the smallest one, tucked into the far corner. The assignment was not accidental. Wildcard entrants without ranking or affiliation got the smallest space, the worst sightlines, and the last access to the warm-up mats. Dara sat on the bench in her bay and closed her eyes. She had been on Meridian Station for 11 days. She had arrived on a cargo freighter, working passage as a loader to cover the transit cost. She had registered for the Open on the second day, paying the entry fee with credits she had saved over 14 months of docking work at a refueling station 3 systems away. The registration clerk, a Voss with compound eyes and a weary demeanor, had processed her entry without comment, but Dara had seen the clerk's antennae flatten in the way that meant skepticism. No human had ever competed in the Cathari Open Grappling Invitational. No human had ever applied. The competition predated humanity's entry into galactic society by over 2,000 years. It was the oldest continuous combat sport in the known galaxy, governed by a rule set that had been refined over millennia into a system so precise and so thoroughly dominated by the Cathari that most other species treated it less as a sport and more as a cultural monument. You did not enter the Cathari Open the way you entered a race or a tournament. You entered it the way you entered a cathedral, with awareness that you were very small and the structure around you was very old. The Cathari had won 61 of the last 73 Opens. The remaining 12 had been split among the Voss, the Druimi, and once a Shelveni physicist who had used biomechanical optimization algorithms to reach the quarterfinals before being submitted in 11 seconds by a Cathari teenager. Dara was none of those things. She was a dock worker. She was human. She had bare feet and cloth tape on her hands. And she had trained for this for 7 years. Not at an academy, not under a grandmaster, not with harmonic resistance training or neural-linked reflex conditioning, or any of the technologies that modern galactic combat sports considered baseline. She had trained in a cargo hold on a refueling station. On mats she had made herself from packing foam and hull liner, following instruction videos that she had downloaded from a Cathari educational archive and translated, frame by frame, into movements that her human body could replicate, adapt, and eventually make her own. 7 years, every rest cycle, every off shift. Alone in a cargo hold, drilling the same positions, the same transitions, the same escapes, the same submissions, until the movements stopped being movements and became the way her body thought. Her instructor, if you could call him that, was a dead Cathari named Vorik Desai. Desai had been a grandmaster 200 years before Then. He was widely considered the greatest technician in the history of the Open, a grappler whose style was so fundamentally sound that his competition footage was still used as the primary teaching material in every Cathari academy. He had never lost a bout. He had retired undefeated after 14 cycles and spent the rest of his life producing the instructional archive that Dara had found, by accident, while organizing data storage crates at the refueling station. The archive was not designed for non-Cathari. It assumed a Cathari body, longer limbs, prehensile tail, clawed feet, a spine with 3 additional articulation points that humans did not possess. Every technique in the archive required adaptation. Every drill required modification. Every principle had to be translated from a body that could wrap and coil and anchor with a tail into a body that could not. Dara had done it anyway, frame by frame, year by year, alone. She opened her eyes. On the display screen in her bay, the current bout was ending. A Druami competitor tapped out to a Cathari arm lock in 41 seconds. The crowd's approval shook the tunnel walls. Dara's bout was next. She stood, unwrapped and rewrapped her hands, and walked toward the arena entrance. The tunnel narrowed to a single corridor that opened onto the bright platform. The noise from the crowd was a physical thing, a wall of sound that pressed against her skin. At the corridor's far end, Torek Van was already on the platform. He was a standard Cathari male, 10 feet tall, 300 pounds of scaled muscle, with a competition record that included 73 bouts and only 14 losses. He wore the silver and black training suit of the Meridian School, and he moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had been competing since before Dara was born. He saw Dara emerge from the tunnel and his head tilted, the same tilt, the same assessment, the same conclusion. The adjudication panel's announcer, a Voss with a voice that could cut through the arena noise like a blade, introduced the bout. Opening round. Bracket position 47. Torek Van, Meridian School, ranked 31st, versus Dara Osai, human, unaffiliated, unranked. The crowd noise shifted, not louder but different in texture. Curiosity layered over amusement. A few scattered hisses from the Cathari sections, a low drum from the Voss contingent. In the neutral galleries, beings leaned forward. Grandmaster Thin, in his alcove, set down his notation tablet and watched. He did not expect to watch for long. The starting signal pulsed. Torek Van moved first. He was fast, the way all Cathari were fast, a burst of coiled power that closed the distance between them in less than a second. His leading arm swept low, aiming to hook Dara's leg and collapse her base. It was a standard Cathari opening, used in approximately 60% of first-round bouts, effective against smaller opponents because it forced them to the ground where Cathari length and flexibility dominated. Dara was not there. She had moved before Torek's arm completed its arc, shifting her weight to her back foot and rotating her hips away from the hook. The motion was small, precise, and wasted nothing. Torek's arm swept through empty air. His momentum carried him forward half a step, and for a fraction of a second, his weight was committed and his base was narrow. Dara put her hand on his shoulder. It was not a strike. It was not a grab. It was a touch, placed with the specificity of a surgeon marking an incision point. Her palm settled on the ridge of muscle where Torek's neck met his shoulder, and she used his own forward momentum to guide him past her. He stumbled one step, recovered, and turned. The arena was quiet. Not silent. 11,000 spectators do not go silent, but the quality of the noise changed. The amusement dimmed. Something else took its place, something that did not have a name yet because nobody in the arena had seen what had just happened before. A human had redirected a Cathari's charge with a touch. Torek reset. His eyes, slit-pupilled and amber, narrowed. He had felt the touch on his shoulder. He had felt how precise it was, how it had found the exact point where a redirect required the least force. That was not the movement of someone who did not know grappling. He came again, faster, with a double-level entry designed to take away both the leg and the hip simultaneously. It was a compound technique, more advanced, typically reserved for opponents who had demonstrated the ability to defend single entries. Dara sprawled. The sprawl was textbook Cathari defense, adapted for a human body. She dropped her hips, extended her legs back, and drove her weight down onto Torek's shoulders. But where a Cathari would have used their tail as a third anchor point, Dara used her forearms, framing against Torek's head and controlling his posture with a cross-face pressure that locked his neck at an angle. Torek grunted. He tried to circle to his right. Dara circled with him, maintaining the angle, keeping her weight distributed so that every adjustment he made worked against his own structure. In the judge's alcove, Grandmaster Then leaned forward. He had seen the sprawl. He had seen 1,000 sprawls. He had taught thousands more. But he had not seen a non-Cathari execute a Cathari defensive sprawl with that precision. The crossface was correct. The hip angle was correct. The weight distribution was correct. It was not an approximation. It was the technique, translated into a body that should not have been able to produce it. Then picked up his notation tablet and made a different kind of note. Torek disengaged, backing out of the sprawl with a Cathari roll that put distance between them. He stood. His breathing was slightly faster than it had been at the start, not winded, alert. He looked at Dara differently now. The next exchange lasted 40 seconds, and in it, Torek Von learned 3 things about the human he was fighting. First, she knew Cathari grappling, not human grappling adapted for alien opponents. Cathari grappling, the real thing, the 2,000-year-old system that was supposed to be untranslatable to non-Cathari physiology. Second, she was patient. She did not attack. She moved, defended, redirected, and waited. Third, she was listening. Every time Torek committed to an entry, she was already positioned for the counter, as if she could feel the technique before it arrived. At the 90-second mark, Torek went for a throw. A hip throw, the most fundamental technique in the Cathari canon. He loaded Dara's weight onto his hip, turned, and lifted. Dara hooked her leg behind his knee. It was a counter that existed in Vorik Desai's archive, a technique so old that most modern Cathari academies had stopped teaching it because it required perfect timing and a willingness to accept the throw's initial lift before redirecting it. Dara accepted the lift. She let Torek commit to the rotation. And at the apex, when his balance was entirely in his hips and his anchor was his planted foot, she hooked his knee and pulled. Torek went down. He landed on his back with Dara on top, and in the time it took the crowd to register what had happened, she had transitioned to a position that Grandmaster Then recognized immediately, the Desai mount, named after the Grandmaster who had invented it 200 years ago, a position so technically demanding that modern Cathari students typically trained it for 3 years before attempting it in competition. Dara locked it in 4 seconds. Torek fought. He was strong, fast, and experienced, and he used every tool in his considerable arsenal. He bridged, shrimped, twisted, and tried to create the space he needed to escape. Dara answered each attempt with adjustments that were precise, calm, and minimal. She did not muscle anything. She did not force anything. She moved the way water moves around a stone, exactly enough and no more. At 2 minutes and 11 seconds, she sank a choke. It was a Desai-style collar choke, applied from the mount with the wrist positioned behind the skull ridge where Cathari scales were thinnest, and the carotid analog ran closest to the surface. It was a technique designed for Cathari anatomy by a Cathari grandmaster, and Dara applied it to a Cathari body with the certainty of someone who had drilled it 10,000 times in a cargo hold. Torek tapped. The arena did not know what to do. The Cathari sections were motionless. The Voss had stopped drumming. The neutral galleries were frozen in the particular stillness that settles over a crowd when it has witnessed something that does not fit any of its existing categories. The bout timer read 2 minutes and 34 seconds. Grandmaster Then stared at his notation tablet. He had written one word on it during the final exchange, Desai. He underlined it. Then he underlined it again. Dara released the choke, helped Torek sit up, and bowed. It was not a human bow. It was the Kethari competition bow, executed with the precise angle and duration that Desai's archive prescribed for a respectful post-bout acknowledgement between competitors of different rank. Torek stared at her. His scales had shifted from their natural deep green to a paler shade, which in Kethari physiology indicated shock. He returned the bow slowly, as if he was not sure the gesture was real. Dara walked back to the staging tunnel. The arena remained quiet behind her. In the competitor staging area, the cluster of Vosk school Kethari had watched the bout on their display screens. The scarred male who had mocked her was standing in front of his bay with his arms at his sides. His mouth was slightly open. The tail-slapping female next to him had her tail curled tight against her leg, which was the Kethari equivalent of a hand pressed over a dropped jaw. Dara walked past them. She did not look at them. She went to her bay, sat down, and rewrapped her hands. The second round draw put her against Keshin Far, a Voss compound grappler ranked 19th. The Voss used a different grappling tradition than the Kethari, emphasizing their forearms and low center of gravity to control opponents through constant pressure. Keshin Far had been competing for 12 years and had never been submitted. The bout lasted 4 minutes and 8 seconds. Dara spent the first 3 minutes defending. Keshin's forearm pressure was relentless, a constantly shifting cage of limbs that probed for openings and punished any gap in posture. It was smothering, methodical, and exhausting to endure. Most competitors crumbled under it. The Voss style did not beat opponents. It wore them down. Dara did not crumble. She defended each pressure point with the same patient precision she had used against Torek, accepting the weight, breathing through it, and waiting. At the 3-minute mark, Keshin made a transition. She shifted from pressure control to a submission entry, reaching for Dara's left arm with her 2 lower hands while her upper hands maintained head control. It was a standard Voss progression, the logical next step after a prolonged pressure phase. Dara gave her the arm. She extended it, let Keshin commit to the armbar entry. And then, in the narrow window between commitment and completion, she rotated her entire body, inverting under Keshin's base, threading her legs through the Voss fighter's forearm guard, and emerging on the opposite side in a position that had no name in Voss grappling because the Voss had never seen it. It had a name in Desai's archive. It was called the river turn. From the river turn, Dara applied a leg entanglement that immobilized Keshin's primary base limbs. Keshin's forearms scrambled for purchase, but the entanglement removed her ability to bridge or roll. And without those options, the Voss fighter was trapped in a position she had never trained to escape because no one had ever put her there. Dara finished with a heel hook variant adapted from Desai's curriculum. Keshin tapped at 4 minutes and 8 seconds. The crowd noise was different now. The laughter was gone. In its place was a sound that Dara did not recognize at first because she had never heard it directed at herself. The low, rumbling murmur of an audience revising its expectations in real time. In the judge's alcove, Then turned to the adjudicator beside him, a Dreumy elder named Post who had been judging the Open for 30 years. Post's face tendrils were knotted in what Then recognized as profound confusion. "She is using Desai," Post said. "Yes. She is human." "Yes. Desai is Kethari. Desai's system requires a tail. It requires triarticulate spinal rotation. It requires ankle claws for floor purchase. It requires none of those things," Then said quietly. "It requires understanding. The rest is adaptation." Post stared at him. "Vorik, with respect, you cannot adapt Desai to a tailless biped." Then looked at the arena floor, where Dara was helping Keshin to her feet and exchanging the cross-species bow of mutual respect. "Apparently," he said, "you can." The quarterfinal bracket was announced within the hour. Dara's next opponent was Driven Sulk, a Cathari ranked 8th, a Vosk School senior student, and the scarred male who had mocked her in the staging area. The irony was not lost on the crowd. Driven Sulk had been one of the loudest voices dismissing the human's entry. Now he was facing her in a bout that would determine whether she reached the semi-finals of the most prestigious grappling competition in the galaxy. The arena was full, every seat occupied. The overflow galleries had been opened for the first time in 3 cycles. Word had spread beyond the station. 2 galactic sports networks had redirected coverage drones to Meridian. The betting markets, which had opened Dara's line at 200 to 1 against reaching the second round, had crashed and reopened 3 times as odds adjusted to accommodate an outcome nobody had modeled. Driven Sulk entered the arena with the measured stride of a senior competitor. His scar caught the overhead lights. His jaw was set. He was not laughing anymore. Dara entered from the opposite tunnel, same gray suit. Same bare feet, same cloth tape on her hands. The starting signal pulsed. Driven did not charge. He circled. He had watched both of Dara's bouts on the staging area screens. He had seen what happened to Torek when he rushed. He had seen what happened to Keshin when she committed. He was not going to make those mistakes. He circled for 30 seconds, testing Dara's reactions with feints. A half step forward, a twitch of his leading hand, a shift in his tail position. Dara tracked each one without responding. She stood in a neutral posture, weight centered, hands loose, eyes on his chest rather than his limbs. She was reading him the way Desai's archive taught, not by watching the hands which could lie, but by watching the center of mass which could not. At 45 seconds, Driven engaged. He used a Vosk School chain, a linked sequence of 3 techniques designed to flow into each other regardless of the opponent's defense. Entry, transition, back take. It was his best sequence. He had drilled it since adolescence. Dara defended the entry. Driven transitioned. Dara adjusted. Driven went for the back take. Dara let him have it. In every grappling tradition in the galaxy, surrendering the back was considered a catastrophic error. The back was the most dominant control position. From the back, a grappler had access to chokes, spinal manipulations, and positional dominance that was nearly impossible to escape. Dara gave Driven her back, and then did something that made Grandmaster Thin drop his notation tablet. She rolled. Not a scramble, not a desperate escape attempt. A roll. Controlled, precise, executed with the fluid mechanics of someone who had internalized the principle so deeply that the movement arose from instinct rather than decision. She rolled into Driven's hooks, collapsed the space between them, and used the Cathari's own grip to generate the rotation she needed to invert under his body, clear his control, and emerge facing him with both of his arms trapped in an overhook that locked his shoulders at maximum extension. The technique was called the Dead Star Roll. It existed in exactly one place, the advanced section of Vorik Desai's archive, in a chapter titled Techniques for Circumstances of Apparent Defeat. Desai had invented it. It had been considered theoretical by every Cathari academy for 200 years, because it required the practitioner to accept total positional loss before the counter became available. Nobody in 200 years had been willing to lose that much position on purpose. Dara had practiced it 11,000 times. Driven Sulk, Vosk School senior, 8th ranked in the galaxy, 73 professional bouts. The fighter who had told a human to run from the bracket found himself locked in a double overhook with his shoulders wrenched to their anatomical limit, and a small, calm woman looking directly into his eyes from a distance of 6 inches. He fought hard. He was strong and skilled, and he had years of training and competition experience. He bridged with enough force to crack the arena surface. He twisted with the full torque of a Cathari spine. He tried every escape his 12 years of Vosk training had given him. Dara held. She held the way stone holds against water, not by resisting, but by being exactly where the force needed her not to be. At 1 minute and 53 seconds, she transitioned from the overhook to a shoulder lock. Driven's scales went pale. His jaw clenched. He held for 4 seconds, then 5, then 6. He tapped. The arena erupted. It was not the roar of a crowd watching a favorite win. It was a deeper sound, more complex, the sound of 11,000 beings processing something that did not fit inside their understanding of how competition worked. A human, an unranked, unaffiliated, unsponsored human who had trained alone in a cargo hold, had just submitted the 8th-ranked grappler in the galaxy, using a technique that had been invented by the greatest Cathari grandmaster in history and been considered impossible for 2 centuries. Dara released the lock. She helped Driven sit up. She bowed the Cathari competition bow. Driven looked at her. His scales were pale and his breathing was ragged, but his expression was not anger. It was something rawer than that, the expression of someone who has had a belief removed so quickly that they can still feel the shape of where it used to be. "Where did you learn that?" he said. His voice was hoarse. "Vorik Desai," Dara said. Driven stared. "Desai has been dead for 200 years. His archive hasn't." Driven processed this. He processed it the way a person processes being told that the mountain they thought was extinct has been building pressure the whole time. "No one teaches the dead star role," he said. "No academy, no master. It's considered theoretical." "I didn't learn it from a master," Dara said. "I learned it from the recording." "How many times?" 11,000, give or take. Driven's jaw worked. Then slowly he bowed again. It was deeper than the first bow. In Cathari tradition, the deeper the bow, the greater the respect. His was nearly perpendicular. Dara returned it and walked to the tunnel. The semi-final was announced for the following morning. In the aftermath of the quarterfinal, the arena's social spaces filled with a new kind of conversation. Species that had attended the Open for decades, without exchanging more than transactional pleasantries, found themselves standing in clusters, discussing what they had just witnessed with the intensity of people trying to verify a shared hallucination. A Druami merchant who had come to Meridian for a supply contract and attended the Open as an afterthought told a Shelvini physicist that he had never seen a Vosk school fighter bow that deeply to anyone, let alone an alien. The Shelvini responded that the depth of the bow was not the interesting part. The interesting part was that the human had returned it at equal depth, not deeper, which would have been false modesty, and not shallower, which would have been arrogance. Equal, as if she understood instinctively that the exchange required balance. At the betting markets, 3 Voss bookmakers were arguing about how to set odds for a semi-final that their models could not parse. The human had no historical data, no training lineage, no measurable baseline. The algorithms that powered interstellar sports betting required inputs, physical metrics, competition history, academy affiliation, coaching staff, sponsorship tier. Dara Osai had none of these. She had cloth tape and bare feet. The algorithms returned errors. The bookmakers, for the first time in their collective careers, set the line by intuition. Dara's opponent would be Res Kaven, ranked 3rd, a Cathari female from the Voss Cathari hybrid school who had won the Open twice and was considered the most technically complete fighter in the current field. Dara spent the evening in her quarters, a small crew cabin she had rented at station minimum rate. The cabin was 4 meters by 3, with a fold-down bunk, a hydration dispenser, and a porthole that looked out onto the station's exterior docking ring, where cargo shuttles drifted in and out of the loading bays on automated approach vectors. The view was industrial and impersonal, exactly like the refueling station where she had spent 7 years. That did not bother her. She had never needed the view to be anything other than what it was. She ate a meal of reconstituted rice and dried fish, purchased from the station's commissary at the lowest price tier. The rice was overcooked, and the fish was salty in the particular way that reconstituted protein was always salty, a uniform mineral tang that had nothing to do with the sea and everything to do with shelf stability. She ate it without complaint, the way she ate everything, as fuel, consumed with attention but without ceremony. She drank water, she stretched, she visualized. She did not watch footage of Hadnt. She did not study opponent-specific strategies. She did not have a corner team to discuss tactics with. She ran through Desai's archive in her mind, the way a musician might run through scales, not thinking about the opponent, thinking about the art. Desai's voice, translated from 200-year-old Cathari, played in her memory like a mantra she had absorbed through repetition. Technique is not the movement. Technique is the understanding that makes the movement inevitable. She wrapped her hands, she slept. The arena the next morning was beyond capacity. Station Commander Heath had authorized standing room access to the maintenance corridors surrounding the arena's upper tier. Every display screen on Meridian Station was carrying the feed. 3 additional galactic sports networks had requested coverage access overnight. The betting markets had stopped offering odds on Dara's elimination and had begun offering odds on how far she would go. Hadnt entered the arena to a sustained Cathari acclaim, a rhythmic hissing that 1,100 Cathari spectators produced in unison. She was tall, lean, with scales that shifted from dark emerald to black depending on the light. She wore the crimson training suit of the Vas Cathari school and moved with the precise, unhurried confidence of someone who had earned the right to take her time. She looked at Dara across the platform. There was no mockery in her gaze. She had watched the quarterfinal. She had seen the dead star roll. She knew what she was facing. Dara looked back. She bowed. Resk returned it at equal depth, which was a statement. Equal depth meant, I consider you a peer. The starting signal pulsed. This bout was different. Resk did not test. She did not circle. She engaged immediately with a pressure sequence that combined Cathari fluidity with Vas-style constant contact. It was suffocating, relentless, and technically brilliant. She attacked transitions, threatened submissions, withdrew, attacked again, shifted angles, and maintained a pace that would have exhausted most competitors in the first 2 minutes. Dara survived. She survived the way she had survived 7 years of training alone. Not by matching Resk's output, but by being economical. Every defense was minimal. Every escape was tight. She spent no energy that was not strictly necessary, and she absorbed Resk's pressure the way Earth absorbs rain. Quietly, completely, without being destroyed by it. At the 4-minute mark, Resk had attempted 14 submission entries. Dara had defended all 14. She had not attempted a single attack of her own. The crowd was silent, not with amusement, with the particular focus that settles over an audience watching something they do not fully understand but know is important. In the judge's alcove, Hadnt was motionless. His eyes tracked every exchange with the processing speed of a species that had evolved to track prey in dense jungle canopy. He had judged over 1,000 bouts. He had seen every technique, every strategy, every approach to the art of grappling that existed in the contemporary canon. He had never seen anyone fight the way this human fought. It was not that her technique was superior to Resk's. It was not. Resk was more skilled, faster, stronger, and more experienced. By any objective metric, Resk was the better grappler. But Dara was doing something that Hadnt had only ever seen one other fighter do, and that fighter had been dead for 2 centuries. She was not fighting Resk, she was listening to her. Every defense, every escape, every adjustment Dara made was a response not to what Resk was doing, but to what Resk was about to do. She was reading the Cathari's intentions through the subtle shifts in weight, the micro-adjustments of grip, the barely perceptible changes in breathing that preceded each attack. She was not faster than Resk. She was earlier. At 6 minutes and 12 seconds, Resk committed to her best technique, a rolling back take that transitioned into a neck crank, the submission that had won her 2 opens. She loaded the entry, committed her weight, and rolled. Dara rolled with her. Not against her, with her. In the same direction at the same speed, matching Resk's rotation precisely so that the Cathari's technique produced 0 positional advantage. It was like trying to throw a shadow. The movement happened, but nothing changed. Resk came out of the roll in neutral position. Dara was already there, facing her, hands loose, weight centered. For the first time in the bout, Resk paused. Her breathing was elevated. Her scales had darkened, which in Cathari physiology indicated maximum exertion. She had been fighting at full capacity for over 6 minutes, deploying every technique in her considerable arsenal, and she had achieved nothing. Dara's breathing was steady. Her hands were still wrapped in white cloth tape. Her face carried the particular calm of someone who had been waiting for this moment for 7 years and was in no hurry to see it end. Resk came again. This time she chained 4 techniques in rapid succession, flowing from one to the next without pause, a continuous stream of attacks that represented the pinnacle of modern Cathari grappling. Dara defended all 4, and then, for the first time in the bout, she attacked. It was a single technique, a sweep from the bottom position, executed during the fraction of a second between Resk's 3rd and 4th chain entries, when the Cathari's base was committed to the transition, and her weight was distributed for offense rather than defense. The sweep was from Desai's archive. It was called the Quiet Answer. It was designed for exactly this moment, the moment when a superior opponent's aggression created the opening that patience had been waiting for. Resk went to her back. Dara was on top. The transition had taken less than a second. The arena roared. From the mount Dara worked. She did not rush. She did not force. She applied pressure in increments, each one small, each one building on the last, each one closing the space that Resk needed to escape. It was not overwhelming force. It was accumulation. The steady, relentless accumulation of tiny advantages that together became inescapable. Resk fought the mount for 90 seconds. She used every escape technique, every defensive principle, every trick of leverage and timing that her 2 open championships had given her. She was brilliant. She was relentless. She was fighting with everything she had. It was not enough. At 8 minutes and 41 seconds, Dara sank the Desai collar choke. Resk held for 8 seconds. Then she tapped. The sound that the arena produced was not a cheer. It was not applause. It was a sound that had no category in any species' emotional taxonomy. A sound produced by 11,000 beings, simultaneously realizing that they were witnessing something that would be discussed for longer than any of them would live. A human, unranked, untrained by any master, unaffiliated with any academy, was in the final of the Cathari Open. Dara released the choke and helped Resk sit up. The Cathari female's dark scales were trembling, not with weakness but with the physiological aftershock of total exertion. She looked at Dara with an expression that carried no resentment. It was the expression of a competitor who had been defeated by something they respected too much to resent. "You listened to me," Resk said. "Yes. The whole bout you listened. You heard every technique before I threw it. I heard the preparation. The technique follows the preparation." Resk was still for a long moment. That is a Desai principle. It is the first principle, Chapter 1. Resk's scales shifted to a warmer shade of green, which was the Cathari equivalent of a smile. "You learned our art better than we teach it." "I learned Desai's art. He is the one who taught it. I just listened." Resk bowed deeply. Dara returned it. In the staging area, competitors from every species and every school had gathered around the display screens. The normal pre-bout rituals of warm-up and mental preparation had been abandoned. Nobody was warming up. Nobody was running technique drills. They were standing in clusters of mixed species, watching the replay of the quiet answer sweep on a loop, and the thing that Dara would never know was the expressions on their faces. The Vosk school fighters were stone still, their tails locked against their legs. A pair of Druami light grapplers were gripping each other's forearms in the way their species expressed profound emotion. A Vosk competitor, a four-armed veteran of 11 Opens who had seen every technique and every fighter the galaxy had produced, was shaking her head slowly, her compound eyes cycling through their full spectrum of focus, as if she was trying to see the sweep from every possible angle simultaneously, and still could not believe it existed. In the public concourses outside the arena, Meridian Station's civilian population had joined the event in a way that no Open had achieved in living memory. Shop vendors had turned their display screens to the coverage feed. Docking crews on the outer ring were streaming audio commentary through their helmet channels. A Cathari child, no more than 4 cycles old, was imitating the Disci mount on the concourse floor, using her tail as a balance point, while her mother watched and did not correct her form, because the form was wrong but the impulse was right. In the judge's alcove, Grandmaster Then stood. He stood slowly, the way very large beings stand when they have made a decision that requires the full weight of their authority. The 2 adjudicators beside him looked up. "I will fight the final," Then said. Post's face tendrils unknotted and then reknotted in a different pattern. "Vorik, you retired from competition 6 cycles ago." "I am unretiring. The rules allow a grandmaster to enter any bout, but the tradition is." "The tradition," Then said, "was established by Vorik Disci. He wrote it into the Open's charter. A grandmaster may enter the final if the final presents a competitor whose art demands the grandmaster's personal response." He looked down at the arena floor, where Dara was walking toward the tunnel. "This competitor's art demands my personal response." The announcement hit the station like a pressure wave. Grandmaster Vorik Then, the most dominant competitor in the Open's modern history, undefeated in 97 career bouts, retired for 6 cycles, would fight the final against the human. The final was scheduled for the following evening, 23 hours. The entirety of Meridian Station spent those hours in a state of suspended anticipation that affected productivity across all departments. Commander Heath reported, in his daily operational log, that reactor maintenance fell 17% behind schedule because the engineering crew could not stop discussing the bout. The medical bay treated 4 cases of stress-induced scale shedding among Cathari personnel. The station's mess hall reported that meal conversation had shifted entirely to a single topic, across all species, all shifts, all dietary sections. In the Cathari sections of the station, something quieter was happening. Veterans of previous Opens, competitors who had won and lost and retired and returned, gathered in small groups and spoke in low voices about what they had seen. The consensus formed slowly, the way weather fronts form over oceans, not all at once, but with a gathering inevitability that everyone could feel. The human was real, not a fluke, not a statistical anomaly, not a wildcard who had caught 2 favorable matchups. She was real, and she was using their art, and she was using it correctly, and the implications of that were large enough that nobody wanted to be the first to say them out loud. Because if a human could learn this size system alone from a recording, without a teacher, without a training partner, without a body designed for it, then the art was not what the Cathari had believed it was. It was not theirs. It was not species-locked. It was not a product of Cathari physiology. It was something older and more fundamental than anatomy, and it had been waiting, for 2,000 years, for someone desperate enough and stubborn enough to prove it. Dara spent the 23 hours the same way she had spent every other pre-bout period. She ate, she stretched, she visualized, she wrapped her hands. Twice during the evening, someone knocked on her cabin door. The first was a Drumi journalist requesting an interview for the Galactic Sports feed. Dara declined politely and returned to her stretching. The second was a delegation of 3 Cathari junior instructors from a regional training hall on the Cathari outer colonies, who had pooled their travel credits to reach Meridian after seeing the quarterfinal footage. They stood in her doorway with the particular posture of beings who wanted to ask something, but were not sure they had the right. The tallest of them, a young female with bronze-tinged scales and earnest amber eyes, asked if Dara would consider accepting an honorary affiliation with their training hall. It would come with a stipend, equipment access, and living quarters on their station. Dara thanked them. She said she would think about it. They bowed and left, walking backward down the corridor, which was a Cathari gesture of deference typically reserved for addressing elders. After they left, Dara sat on her bunk and looked at the porthole. The cargo shuttles drifted in the loading bay's approach lane, their running lights blinking in the rhythmic pattern that meant standard automated docking. She had watched lights like these for 7 years, from a different porthole, on a different station after every training session. The view had never changed. She had. She did not seek out advice. She did not study Then's competition footage, though it was available on every screen aboard the station. She already knew Then's fighting. She had studied it years ago when she first found Desai's archive. Then's style was an evolution of Desai's principles, refined through natural Cathari advantages in size, speed, and flexibility that Dara did not possess. But Desai's principles did not require size, speed, or flexibility. They required understanding. Dara had understanding. She had 7 years of it, earned in silence in a cargo hold alone. The arena on the night of the final was a different creature than it had been on the first day. Every seat filled, every gallery packed, every maintenance corridor and auxiliary viewing space opened. Station sensors estimated 18,000 beings in the arena complex, 7,000 beyond designed capacity. 12 galactic networks carried the live feed. The Cathari homeworld's primary sports channel, which had not covered the Open's early rounds in over a decade because the outcomes were considered foregone, had sent an emergency commentary crew. Grandmaster Then entered the arena from the main entrance, the one reserved for grandmasters and open champions. He wore no training suit. He wore the traditional Cathari competition wrap, a minimal binding of dark fabric around his torso and limbs that left his scales exposed and his movement unrestricted. He was enormous, 12 feet of iridescent green-scaled muscle that caught the arena lights and refracted them into emerald sparks. He moved like a river, fluid and inexorable, and completely without waste. The acclaim was deafening. 18,000 beings produced a sound that the arena's acoustic dampeners could not fully contain. The walls vibrated. The platform floor hummed. Then reached the center of the platform and stood. He did not warm up. He did not stretch. He stood with his hands at his sides and waited. Dara entered from the wildcard tunnel, gray suit, bare feet, white cloth tape. The contrast was absolute. Then was a monument. Dara was a whisper. He filled the arena with his presence. She occupied exactly as much space as she needed and no more. She walked to the center. She bowed. The Cathari competition bow, precise angle, precise duration. Then returned the bow, equal depth. The arena noted this, equal depth from a grandmaster to an unranked human wildcard. The Voss announcer's voice cut through the noise. Final round, Grandmaster Vorik Then versus Dara Osai, human, unaffiliated, unranked. No time limit. No time limit. The final was the only bout in the Open that carried no clock. It ended when one fighter submitted or when the Grandmaster declared it concluded. The starting signal pulsed. Then moved, not fast, deliberately. He advanced with measured steps that ate the distance between them at a pace that felt geological. Each step carried the weight of 97 undefeated bouts, and 19 cycles of Grandmaster authority. The arena floor dimpled under his feet. Dara held her position. She did not retreat. She stood, weight-centered, hands loose, eyes on his chest. Then engaged at his own pace. His first technique was a grip fight, a battle for hand position that would determine the terms of the grappling exchange. In Cathari competition, the grip fight was considered the truest test of a fighter's understanding. It was not about strength. It was about feel, about knowing where the opponent's hands wanted to go and being there first. Dara's hands met Then's. The size difference was enormous. His fingers could wrap entirely around her wrists, but size was not the variable that mattered. The variable that mattered was sensitivity, the ability to feel intention through contact. They grip-fought for 45 seconds. In that time, the 18,000 spectators who did not understand grappling at a technical level saw two fighters moving their hands in small, unremarkable patterns. The spectators who did understand what they were watching stopped breathing. Then was testing. Every grip change was a question. Every pressure shift was a probe. He was learning Dara's game through her hands, the way a reader learns a book through the first paragraph. Dara answered every question, not by resisting, by responding. Her grips adapted to his in real time, countering each probe with an adjustment that was not defensive but conversational. She was speaking to him in the language of his own art. Then felt it. He felt it in his hands, in the quality of the resistance, in the precise way this small human met his pressure and transformed it. He had felt this quality before. Once. In a recording of Vorik Desai's final exhibition bout, 200 years old, preserved in the Cathari Cultural Archive. Then had studied that recording more times than he could count. He had spent his career trying to achieve the quality of responsiveness that Desai had demonstrated. He was feeling it now, from a human. Then stepped back. He released his grips. He stood at the center of the arena and looked at Dara with an expression that no one in the audience had ever seen on his face. It was respect, not the kind that follows achievement. The kind that precedes it, the kind that says, I recognize what you are. And then Grandmaster Vorik then, for the first time in 6 cycles, truly fought. The bout that followed was the finest grappling exchange in the history of the Open, and every being who witnessed it knew it as it happened. Then attacked with the full depth of his ability, not the measured, controlled Grandmaster presence he had maintained since retirement. The real thing, the fighter he had been at his peak, magnified by 6 additional years of study and understanding. He was better than Dara, faster, stronger, more experienced, more technically refined. He was, by any objective measure, the superior grappler. But Dara had something that Then did not. She had learned the art from its source. Not the evolved, refined, institutionalized version that the academies taught. The original. The raw principles that Desai had distilled from 2,000 years of tradition and encoded in his archive. The art before it was polished. The art before it was optimized. The art in its truest form when it was still more philosophy than sport. And she had translated it into a body that was not designed for it. And in the translation, she had found something that the Cathari, in their centuries of refinement, had lost. She had found the simplicity underneath the complexity. The fundamental truth that every technique was built on. The thing that Desai had tried to teach, and that his own species had eventually buried under layers of advancement and specialization. The bout lasted 23 minutes. It would be remembered for much longer than that. During those 23 minutes, something happened in the arena that had nothing to do with technique or competition or ranking. The crowd changed. Not their noise, not their energy, but the quality of their attention. In the opening rounds, they had watched Dara the way an audience watches a novelty act, with interest, with surprise, but with the underlying assumption that the novelty would eventually end, and the normal order would reassert itself. Now, watching her match the greatest grappler alive exchange for exchange, they stopped watching a novelty and started watching a truth. The Cathari sections had gone quiet. Not the quiet of shock, which they had already passed through, but the quiet of recognition. They were watching their own art, the art their species had created and refined and dominated for 2 millennia, being performed by an outsider with such fidelity and such depth that it forced them to see it freshly. To see it the way Desai must have seen it when he first codified it, not as a Cathari tradition, but as a universal language of the body. The Vas had stopped drumming, the Driomi had stopped whistling. Every species in the arena was simply present, bearing witness. 23 minutes of the most technically sophisticated, physically demanding, and aesthetically complete grappling that any living being in the arena had ever seen. Thin attacked, Dara defended, Dara countered, Thin adapted, and the exchange cycled through levels of complexity that the commentary crews could not narrate fast enough to follow. At the 17-minute mark, Dara attempted the dead star roll. Thin defended it. He knew the technique. He had studied Desai's archive himself. He had spent years understanding the dead star roll's mechanics. But his defense created an opening. A small one, a fraction of a second where his weight shifted to compensate for the roll's inversion pressure. And in that fraction, Dara found a position that was not in Desai's archive. It was not in any archive, it was hers. It was the technique that emerged when a human body, trained for 7 years in a Cathari art, adapted and translated and internalized that art so completely that it stopped being Cathari and became something new. Something that had no name because it had never existed before. A synthesis of human biomechanics and Desai's principles that produced a sweep from a position that no Cathari body could have generated because no Cathari body was shaped the way a human body was shaped. Thin went to his back. The arena shattered into noise. 18,000 beings produced a sound that the station's structural integrity monitors flagged as a minor seismic event. Dara was on top, she had mount, on a Grandmaster. Thin fought the position. He fought it with everything, with the full power and skill of 97 undefeated bouts and decades of mastery. He was magnificent. He escaped once, and Dara retook the position. He escaped again, and she retook it again. Each recovery was smoother, tighter, more precise. At 22 minutes, Dara sank the Desai collar choke. She placed it behind Thin's skull ridge, in the same position she had placed it on Torek Von 2 days earlier, in the same position Desai had demonstrated in his archive 200 years earlier. Thin felt the choke lock. He felt the pressure build. He felt his carotid analog compress and his vision narrow. He held for 30 seconds. It was the longest anyone had ever held a locked Desai collar choke. It was a demonstration of will and conditioning that would be studied in Cathari academies for generations. Then, at 23 minutes and 14 seconds, Grandmaster Vorik Thin tapped. The sound that followed was not something that could be described. It was not a cheer. It was not a roar. It was 18,000 beings simultaneously arriving at a truth that none of them had been prepared for, and the emotional shockwave of that arrival produced a sound that was closer to a natural phenomenon than a crowd reaction. The arena shook. The overhead lights swayed. Commander Heath, watching from his office on the station's command level, felt the vibration through the floor. Dara released the choke. She helped Thin sit up. The Grandmaster looked at her. His scales had gone to the pale shade of physiological shock, but his eyes were clear. They were the eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime pursuing mastery and had just been shown its shape by the last person he expected. "You learned from Desai," he said. "From his recording." "Alone?" "Yes." "For how long?" 7 years. Thin was still. Then he said something that made every Cathari in the arena go silent. He said it in formal Old Cathari, the ceremonial register used for matters of the highest gravity. "Desai's art lives in you. I did not believe it could survive outside our species. I was wrong. What you have done is not a victory. It is a gift. You have returned to us something we forgot we had lost." He bowed, not the competition bow. The Grandmaster's bow, a full prostration that the Kethari reserved for moments of absolute acknowledgement. The last time a Grandmaster had performed it in competition was Desai himself, 200 years ago, at his retirement bout. 18,000 beings watched a 12-foot Kethari Grandmaster bow to a human dockworker. Dara returned the bow, equal depth. Her eyes were bright but her face was calm. In the Vosk school section, the scarred fighter named Dreven Sulk was on his feet. He was not hissing. He was not laughing. His scales had shifted to the warm green that indicated deep emotion. His tail was still. Beside him, the female who had slapped her tail in mockery 2 days earlier was weeping, which Kethari did by pressing their jaw ridges together and producing a low harmonic hum. The sound spread through the Kethari sections until 1,100 reptilian voices were humming in unison, a harmonic that meant, in the oldest layer of the Kethari language, "We see you." The neutral galleries erupted in their own species equivalents. The Vas drummed. The Druami whistled. The Shelveni stood motionless with their cranial ridges glowing, which was their way of marking sacred moments. Dara stood at the center of the arena, bare feet on the polymer floor, white cloth tape on her hands, gray training suit without a single mark or logo. She had no team behind her, no academy name on her back, no sponsor on her chest. She had a cargo hold, 7 years of solitude, and an archive left behind by a grandmaster who had been dead for 2 centuries. She had taken his art, learned it in a language it was never meant to speak, and brought it back to the people who had forgotten how to hear it. The Open's closing ceremony was brief. Dara was presented with the champion's seal, a polished disc of dark stone carved with the symbol of the Open. It was small enough to fit in her palm. She held it and looked at it and said, "Thank you." 2 words. The arena accepted them the way it accepted everything she did, without embellishment, without performance, without waste. After the ceremony, Grandmaster Then found Dara in the staging area. She was sitting in her small bay, rewrapping her hands out of habit. The bay was still the smallest one, still tucked into the corner. Nobody had moved her to a better spot. She had not asked. Then sat on the floor across from her. Even sitting, he towered over her. His scales had returned to their normal deep green, and his breathing was steady. "I would like to ask you something," he said. "Yes." "When you train in the cargo hold with no opponent, no feedback, no correction, when you drill a technique 10,000 times against air and memory, and the playback of a dead Grandmaster's archive, how do you know you are doing it correctly?" Dara finished wrapping her left hand. She smoothed the tape with her thumb. "I don't," she said. "Not at first. At first I'm guessing. At first, everything is wrong. The angles don't match because my body is different. The timing doesn't match because I can't feel a partner's reaction. The technique looks nothing like the recording because I don't have a tail or claws or 3 extra spine joints." She started on her right hand. "But I do it again, and again, and eventually the technique stops being something I'm copying and starts being something I understand. When I understand it, I don't need to copy it anymore. I can feel what the technique wants to be, and I can let my body find its own way there." Then was quiet. "That," he said, "is what Desai wrote in his final chapter. The chapter that most of our academies have removed from the curriculum, because they considered it philosophical rather than practical." "I know," Dara said. "It's the chapter I started with." Then's jaw worked. The muscles in his neck shifted under his scales. He made a sound that was not the hissing laughter of his species. It was something quieter and less familiar, a Kethari sound that Dara had never heard before. She would learn later that it was the sound a Kethari makes when they encounter beauty. "Desai would have liked you," Then said. "I hope so. He's the best teacher I ever had." Then stood. He looked down at Dara Osai, human, unaffiliated, unranked, champion of the 73rd Open, sitting in the smallest bay in the staging area, wrapping her hands in cloth tape. "You are welcome at any Cathari Academy," he said. "To train, to teach, to be. The offer has no conditions and no expiration." Dara looked up. "To teach. You know something about our art that we have forgotten. Desai encoded it. We have read the encoding for 200 years without understanding it. You understood it because you had to, because your body forced you to find what the technique meant underneath its shape." He paused. "We have been teaching shape for 2 centuries. You taught meaning in 1 evening." Dara held the champion's seal in her hand. The dark stone was warm from her grip. She ran her thumb over the carved symbol, the ancient Cathari character for open, which also meant to offer and to receive. "I'll stay," she said. "But I'm keeping the cargo hold mats. They're good mats." Then's jaw twitched. It might have been amusement. From a 12-foot Cathari grandmaster, it was hard to tell. "Keep the mats," he said. He bowed one final time, not the grandmaster's bow, the student's bow, the bow that a Cathari gives to someone they wish to learn from. Dara returned it, equal depth, same as always. Then she finished wrapping her hands, tucked the champion's seal into her pocket, and walked out of the arena. The overhead lights hummed. The polymer floor was still warm from 23 minutes of the greatest bout in the Open's 2,000-year history. Her bare feet left no marks on the polymer. They did not need to. 3 days after the final, the Cathari Cultural Preservation Board issued a formal statement. It was addressed to all 7 premier academies and every regional training hall across Cathari space. The statement was 4 sentences long, which was unusual. Cathari bureaucratic documents typically ran to hundreds of pages. Brevity, in their administrative tradition, signaled that the matter was beyond debate. The statement read, "The 73rd Open has revealed a gap in our pedagogical approach. Vorik Desai's complete archive, including the philosophical chapters removed from standard curricula 112 years ago, is hereby restored to mandatory study. Additionally, the board formally recognizes the discipline of cross-species adaptation as a legitimate field of grappling scholarship. The human Dara Os has demonstrated that the art does not belong to the body that created it. It belongs to the mind willing to listen." Grandmaster Then appended his own annotation to the statement. It was a single line, written in the old formal script that grandmasters reserved for matters of permanent record. It read, "She came to our arena with bare feet and cloth tape. She left with something we could not take back and did not want to. She reminded us that mastery is not the end of learning. It is the willingness to begin again." On a refueling station 3 systems away, an empty cargo hold sat in the maintenance level. The packing foam mats were still there, flattened from 7 years of daily use, arranged in a rectangle that approximated a competition platform. The hull liner surface was scuffed with the marks of thousands of drills, the impressions of bare feet pivoting and planting and recovering, over and over in the same patterns, in the same silence, night after night. Nobody else on the station had known what happened in that cargo hold. To the crew, it had been dead storage. To one human dockworker, it had been an academy, a cathedral, a conversation with a teacher who had been dead for 200 years and who had never, not once, stopped teaching. The mats would travel with her. She had told Then she would keep them, and she meant it. They were not equipment, they were origin. The place where a dismissed student had become something that the oldest combat tradition in the galaxy did not have a word for, because it had never needed one before. It would need one now. The Cathari would debate it for years. They would propose terms in formal committees. They would draft definitions and argue about etymological roots and consult linguistic archives. Dara would not participate in the debate. She would be in the training hall on her mats drilling the fundamentals. Chapter 1. First principle. The art left everything,